Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Back in 1988, Games Workshop released Warhammer Armies, a supplement to Warhammer Fantasy Battle 3rd Edition. But how different were the armies back then?
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club, your event or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Not that long ago, I made this video choosing my favourite 5 army books for all of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and this was in my top 5, not least because I'm a bit old and it was the first army book that I ever used, and I absolutely love it. I think 3rd edition stands out a little bit on its own. It had moved on from the first 2 editions of the game, but hadn't quite reached the commercial success of 4th edition when we started to see those big box starter sets, and the same happened with 2nd edition 40k. Because of this, I think 3rd edition kind of has its foot in 2 camps, the early editions of 1 and 2, and then also the later, more modernized version of the game that we saw from 4th edition onwards, and I think that makes it quite unique. There's so many things that we recognize, that we see today in the game and are influences on the modern game today, but there's also a lot of things that have completely disappeared, and I think that makes it really interesting to look at and see the journey that the game has gone on since. So settle down, strap in and enjoy. So this is the tome that I spent many hours poring over as a younger teen. Absolutely love the cover art by Chris Collingwood, and I used to sit there writing lists on lined paper, many projects that never would see fruition. I never bought the miniatures, I never painted the armies at all, but there was lots of fun ideas were born at that time, and I guess at this stage Games Workshop hadn't fully developed Warhammer into what we know it is today. It had a little bit of old elements in, some of the beginnings of new elements, but it was a really exciting time. I guess you can argue that the modern day aesthetic of Warhammer was still finding its feet. And the list of armies was quite different back then. There were only 11 core armies at this time. There were a host of allies and mercenaries that you could take, but the armies were Dark Elves, Wood Elves, High Elves, the Empire, Bretonnia, Chaos, Skaven, Orcs and Goblins, Dwarves, Slann and Undead. Mercenaries and allies are a little bit different to they are today as well. Rather being informed of which units you can take from a particular main list, they have their own small ally and mercenary contingent lists at the back of the book. Written by Nigel Stillman and friends, meeting the other designers in the studio, the book is also filled with wonderful artwork for some really big names. It's a whopping 162 pages before you get to the obligatory pull-out section at the back, and there's some funny things there as well, along with all the usual reference sheets for playing your game and recording your armies. They provided a handy summoning circle of a pentagram, which I'm sure parents suffering from satanic panic were really happy to see. And then, rather amusingly, there's an errata already in the book for the book. So modern day gamers who like to complain a little bit about erratas happening on day 1 of releases, well, it's always happened. Before we get to the army list, there's the usual introductory pages telling you how to construct your list, and I won't be covering it in this video, but I did find a really interesting line in the first paragraph. We mustn't forget the object of the army list, which is to allow speedy construction of balanced armies for fair and competitive play. Now, I'm being a little bit playful there. I'm not suggesting at all that this book was designed for competitive tournament play, but it is designed to balance the game enough that 2 players can meet and have a fairly balanced game, though I'm sure the game was as balanced then as it is today, or not for that matter. It did go on and clarify a little bit further on with an example that 2 players from different parts of the world that don't speak the same language could come together using that same set of rules to have a fairly balanced game of Warhammer. Now I've woken up a few trolls in the comments. Let's take a really quick look at this special rules section before you get to the army list. A lot of it is common stuff that apply across different armies. That for the war altar, which appears in multiple lists as well. And there's also rules like those for the war dancers that appear here rather than in the individual army list itself. Next up is the magic section, and I'm not going to teach you how to play 3rd edition magic within Warhammer. I can barely remember it myself, and I'm not going to relearn it to bore you to death with it here, but things are relatively different to what they are now. You'll notice that heroes or characters have different levels of 5, 10, 15, 20 and 25, and they relate to magic levels, but there are only 4, so the bottom 2 levels are both on level 1, and they have a different number of spells available at those different levels, all in that chart there. And as you can see, there's an awful lot of different spells, multiple spells that can roll, and multiple levels as well. So quite a few more options than there are today. The magical items and weapons and banners are often very recognizable from some of the things that we're used to today, as you'll see. There's a whole host of magical banners, and one of the examples is the battle banner, which gives you plus d6 to your combat res for 100 points, which could be very fantastic or could be pretty swingy and very disappointing. And then there's the old firm favourite down at 25 points at the other end of the scale, the war banner, which works exactly the same way as it does today with +1 to your combat res. There were magical instruments. I'd love to see that return to the game. It'd be a really nice way of buffing some of the less favourable troops with the powerful horn of something or other. Could be fun. And then all the usual things you'd expect. So your bound spells, be that dispels or all powerful rings that were very similar to similar items today. War machines get generalised rules at the start of the book as well, rather than being copied into the individual army lists. And who doesn't love that artwork for the snotling pump wagon and the really fun 2d6 damage chart as well. We're comfortably into the book now, and we still haven't quite reached the army list, and we have a few pages of beastry before we get into those details. And there's quite a few fun entries in there. A very lithe and athletic looking rat ogre, which is very different from what we see in later editions, and also this really cool temple dog from Nippon and Cathay, which would be really nice to see in the modern game. We're going to start with the Dark Elves, and I'm going to speed up a little bit as we move through the book, but I'm going to use the Dark Elves as a bit of an example of how each of these entries works. You can see the army selection at the top, which shows you all your minimums and maximum selections for units and characters, and as we move down towards the bottom of the first page, you get your character selection. Rather than having individual entries like we do in army lists today, they're all there in one big block, and you choose your level of hero, and then you've got all of their weapon options and equipment options to the side, which include things like Dragon 6 for a whopping 750 points. And who says the game wasn't complicated back then? Look at this. Heroes. The army has a theoretical maximum of 26 hero models, imagine, but no more than half the army's total points value may be expended on them. The maximum number of heroes available at each level is given below, and there's a handy chart so you know how many of each hero you can have. My word. We move on to all of the individual army list entries, and this is the fun bit and what I'll focus on more for the subsequent armies. So we've got Helldrakes and Doomsteeds and Doomdrakes and Dark Riders and Shadows. There's a mix there of Cold One Riders and regular horse mounted troops. You'll notice they have minimum and maximum numbers as well, so up to 40 on your Doomdrakes, up to 25 on your Shadows. Notice that isn't units, that's actually number of individual miniatures, which is slightly different to what we're used to today. Obviously, much of the army is recognisable, so we've got crossbowmen and warriors and witch elves, repeating bolt throwers, of course, the war altar, which appears in a number of different army lists with different flavours, and the whelp masters there with their beasts. And then the last page out of the 4 covering the Dark Elves gives you a few more bits of information about constructing your list. So the number of crossbowmen and shadows that can be converted into skirmisher units, for example, your baggage, what allies you can take, what mercenaries you can take, and a few other extra beasts and things like that. For the rest, we're skipping straight to the unit profiles. Now we know how it all works, well, in a loose sense anyway. So we have Elven Lords, as in not characters, but Lords as a unit, and we have Wainwrights, so basically chariots there, and we have Wood Riders, So probably like Glade Riders in the modern sense, up to 40 of them, but you get the idea. They are familiar units, and you'll see that with most of the unit entries. So there's guards and war dancers and lord's bowmen and glade runners and archers and warrior kimbad. So lots of things that feel like things we recognise, but with multiple different names. And then beastmasters and falconers and treemen. Of course, there's no dryads at this stage in the army, but still pretty recognisable stuff. The aesthetical differences between wood elves and high elves was probably not as pronounced back at this time. There's a few more high elves that look a little bit rough and ready like wood elves, and a bit vice versa as well. It's much more about location rather than a real change in those societies. And that is visible straight away with artwork like this. You can see the very war dancer looking high elf there. They will kick straight off with war wains, so more chariots, and then dragonkin, up to 5 of them. Can you imagine that? And then things that are very recognisable, like the silver helms there. And then we've got shore riders, which are more of a sea elf themed cavalry as well. There's less of that these days. A lot of what you see is very similar, of course, the archers, but then there's kith, and there's merchant companies and ships companies and guard and warrior kindreds. It's got a feel really of a mixture of the wood elves, but with a heavy sea elf theme, which is only now covered by the sea guard. It's a slightly different vibe to it, a slightly different lore, but in essence, all of the origins are still there. The Empire are probably even more Holy Roman Empire influenced than the Empire is of today, and you can see that from the artwork and all the liveries on the shields there. So recognisable but different. What you have got is a load of German sounding names, far more than we get in the current lore. They've been toned down an awful lot, and I think that's partly to make sure that things don't sound like they definitely come from any given country. And some of these names are absolutely fantastic, and I'm not even going to attempt to embarrass myself by pronouncing them on the video here. But what you'll see is there's a lot of stuff that's recognisable and has corresponding units today, but there's a lot more of them, a lot more flavour throughout. Units doing similar kinds of things, multiple units with hand weapons, multiple units with crossbows, that kind of stuff. Always things that stand out. So your Reichsguard are still there. You've got your halberdiers and you've got your militia style troops. They just have some really, really fun and cool names as well. Bretonnia, in a similar vein, lean into lots of European history, this time a little bit earlier medieval history. And the army I'm showing here is Dave Andrews' own Bretonnian army, which is absolutely fantastic and illustrates the use of the older miniatures at the time, historical miniatures in many cases at the time as well. There's still a healthy mix of noble knights here, just with completely different names that we're used to in the modern versions of the game. There are different types of knights at different kinds of levels. Some are a little bit more, I wouldn't say they're peasants at this stage, but they're definitely lower class than the most noble knights that you see there. And in a very illustrative way of describing the way they feel about their peasants, look at the names we have for them here. Rapscallions, what rascals. Some absolutely classic names that really goes all the way that you need to know about how the different classes in this society were treated. Obviously there's things like brigands as well that have come back in the latest version of Warhammer with Warhammer the Old World, and then there's a War Altar again. Then there's the classic bombard, and I'm pretty sure that original Citadel miniature is now available through the Foundry Miniatures range. Moving on to Chaos, and I think there's an extra page in there as well with all the extra characters needed when you've got Beastmen, characters and Marauders and Chaos Warriors and all the things you'd expect. The artwork, while different in style, is everything you'd expect from Chaos ranges from Warhammer, as are all the banners and stolen shields and things, and the Chaos stars. Chaos has always been such a strong aesthetic. And then there's loads of things you would expect, far more recognisable than some of the armies. The Chaos Warriors, like the Chaos Horsemen. Now Marauders and Marauder Horse are pictured slightly differently here. They have armour on, and then underneath them you'll see Thug Horse and Thugs, and that's more like what the modern day Marauders are. So now you kind of have 2 levels, and before that you used to have 3. So Marauders were almost like a warrior light, so to speak. So that's an interesting change. And then you've got things like Beastmen and Minotaurs and Beastmasters and Trolls, and yet another altar, this time a Chaos War altar, which I imagine is really, really fun to model. And then the iconic picture of Brian Ansell in front of his miniatures. It's something that's copied so many times by gamers throughout the years. Of course, Chaos will get an awful lot of extra love through the Realm of Chaos books with Slaves of Darkness and The Lost and the Damned. Skaven are one of those armies that hasn't changed much aesthetically or even in naming convention over the years. They've truly been Warhammer all the way through. More wonderful colour artwork to set off the pages in this book, and I really like it. And like I've already said, the aesthetic is extremely recognisable and hasn't changed as much as others. And more army shots. This is Pete Taylor's Skaven collection, and wonderful they look as well. It very much reminds me of the early days reading White Dwarf when I first started playing. And again, my friend had a very large Skaven army, so I've suffered from them many times. And the units, like I've already said, are very similar. We've got Storm Vermin, we've got Clan Rats, and we've got Black Skaven Clan Rats, so there's some slightly different ones there. Skaven Slaves, which were all the way into the game till the Warhammer the Old World update. But again, you just recognise all the things that are there. There's Night Runners, there's Plague Sensor Bearers, there's Gutter Runners, there's Plague Mumps, unit after unit of things that still exist in the game today and even moved over to Age of Sigmar. There's Clan Moulder there, Poisoned Wind, Warp Fire Throwers, Jezzails. It really is very much the same as the modern army. The Orc and Goblin army is pretty recognisable too. Some of the sculpts are showing their age a little bit at the moment. Some maybe came back recently for a made to order, but again, most you will recognise. We have Snorters and Big Uns, and Snorters are bull riders essentially, and Grunters are also bull riders, and there's Boys, and there's Araboys, and there's Battle Chariots, all things that you recognise. Again, a slight repetition of units. Stickers and Goblin Battle Chariots and Goblin Wolf Riders and Gobbos. You can have up to 200 of them. And Fanatics, you'll notice in the pictures a little bit later on, there's no Night Goblins at this stage. They have a different theme. Some Half-Orcs, there's Snotlings, and there's Savage Araboys as well. Trolls and Black Orcs. And most of the units you'll recognise. And then loads of war machines, so the Pump Wagon, and loads of different types of stone throwers, some Goblin, some Orcs. There's even an organ gun, so black powder for Orcs, which was a bit different back then. More Orc stone throwers. Man Mangler, which is another stone thrower, not quite sure why. And then of course the colour pages are Kev Adams, the sculptor of all these wonderful miniatures, own Orc and Goblin collection, and they're real classics. And if you're a fan of Orc and Goblins, then you will no doubt absolutely love these. They are really amazing, and I wish I had some actually. On to Dwarves, and plenty again you'll recognise it definitely from the aesthetics and some of the stuff that we've seen more recently in Warhammer the Old World. The return of Imperial Dwarves, they featured very heavily in this age of the game. The artwork there illustrates it quite well. Some very traditional mountain looking dwarves, but also lots of Imperial dwarves as well, and a Slayer, and yes, a Dwarf Wizard. I have a Dwarf Wizard model. I think he's fantastic. But the units you'll recognise: Clansmen and Hammerers, and you've got Ironbreakers and Dwarf Crossbowmen, all things that, while the aesthetic is slightly different, still exist pretty much in the army list today. There's Longbeards as well there. You will find there's a little bit of duplication of certain units. So you've got your Dwarf Warriors as well there, so they're doing the same job as another, but your Troll Slayers and your Giant Slayers are there. So all the things that you come to expect of a modern day Dwarf army still exist. And then you've got your Sappers, which I suppose are your Miners, and your Dwarf War Engines and your Gnome Warriors. Well, that's something a little bit different. I'd love to see those back again, aside from a Wizard's Familiar, that is. Now for something really different. Not just a Slan as a leader of a Lizardman army, it's just Slan. So of course he's not a Lizardman army, so what do you get? It's still that jungle theme, and Slan are still there. But it's Slan throughout. All the units are frog based, or nearly all the units are frog based. We'll come to another one in a few moments. I remember playing them a little bit. I remember the magic being quite strong, but I can't remember an awful lot else. You can see the themes there. So Alligator Warriors is just a frog wearing an alligator skin, as far as I can tell, and Eagle Warriors is just a frog wearing eagle feathers, and so on. But there's lots of different flavours of frog, including those with blowpipes. You can see that evolution maybe into skinks a little bit later on. So those themes haven't completely gone. They just get developed in a slightly different way, and probably a better way. Probably a little bit more unique, but they were fun at their time for sure. And I did enjoy seeing the models on the table when my next door neighbour used to play. There's even human sleighs, so the shame of it. And as I hinted at, towards the bottom of the list, there are some troglodytes and some lizardmen warriors as well. So again, you can see where the balance over the years have moved away from the frog and towards the lizards and the dinosaurs. The final army list in the book is Undead, and that was before they'd had their split between wet and dry. Very much skeleton focused, as you can imagine this time. They very much match the miniatures ranges, thinking back to all those original skeleton warriors, but we got undead chariots and grim reapers and skeleton warriors and skeleton archers, all things are easy to make from the skeleton box, no doubt, as well as some of the existing metals. We've got carrion and mummies and zombies as well, all the old classics that you expect to see. We have a plague cart and ghouls as well, and of course a skeleton stone thrower. And that was the end of the core army lists in this book, but we're only about 2/3 of the way through because we got all of the ally contingents and mercenaries to follow. There's some real gems in this section of the book, but there's also quite a lot of odd repetition. You'll see that as we get to it. The units that were already in the main army list are repeated in the ally contingents and also then in the mercenary contingent in some cases. So after a short introduction page explaining how it all works in terms of loyalties and things like that, we're on to the chaos allied contingent, and there's lots of things that are recognizable here. So we've got the chaos knights, and then we've got the warriors and things we've already seen earlier in the army list, and that's some of that repetition that I was talking about. Well, we do have minotaurs and we do have beastmen and we do have chaos goblins and centaurs and things that we didn't see earlier on. So it's really expanding the chaos list, and of course we get some chaos dwarves as well, and some of that artwork there relates to some very, very cool chaos dwarf miniatures that I used to own. And of course we've got the chaos dwarf artillery and things as well, mortars. You could build your own small army list from these allied contingents, and I'm sure many people did. So this is a very good sort of addition. The dwarf allied contingent starts with a little bit more of the stuff we've already seen, again, but with slightly different artwork. I definitely have all of the miniatures that are shown there drawn in that pen art, which is really cool. But again, the unit entries aren't exactly new. We have the Dark Elf contingent with a Grim Witch leading it, and a contingent commander and an ally standard bearer. So they have different titles, but you could have built your own characters, I guess, from the main army list and just name them these things. But I do like the lore and theme that's been added there. Then you've got Doom Drakes and Warriors and Doomsdeeds and Witch Elves like you'd have in the regular army list. The High Elf contingent is very similar. You've got a named Spellbard and you've got an Elf contingent commander. Again, could you have made those out of those characters building for the normal army list? I guess you probably could. Same with the standard bearer, but again, I like the theme. And then you have silver helms and warrior kindreds and archers and merchant companies. Again, cool names for them, but I'm not really sure what much they're adding to it outside of the normal army list, but I love the fact that they're there. And as you can imagine, the Wood Elves is the same yet again. So we've got a Wood Elf wizard and a contingent commander and the warrior kinbands as well. And we've got Lord's Bowmen and war dancers and archers and glade runners. And then we have some new things, which is better in my opinion. These are definitely worth having in the book. We've got the Fimir ally contingents. They don't appear elsewhere in the book in any form whatsoever. So you've got your warlord and your wizard and your Fimir and your another wizard and warriors, and it's just really cool and really fun to see. The lore for them at the time would be slightly problematic with today's thinking on it, and I agree they probably shouldn't be in there unless that's changed, but of course it would be. We saw them through Warhammer Forge, through Forge World, and hopefully we'll see them in the future. It's definitely ground that Games Workshop could cover. Now we have the Old World contingent, which again I think is worth it. It's different from what's in the standard army list. Really, really fun. We've got a contingent commander, Imperial Templars, and then we've got Bretonnian knights there as well, and Imperial infantry and border horse and Kislevites. You've got a real mix there between the different medieval themes that you have going on in the game, and I quite like that they're together. And we see the first sort of appearance of Kislevites, which later in the game, as we know, will go on to be something a little bit bigger. then disappear again, and then we're hoping they'll come back again soon. We have an orc and goblin allied contingent, and this is one of those which is a bit of a rinse and repeat with some different names. I'm sure some of the rules might be different, but I'm not going into that level sort of granular detail on them. But you've got the usual stuff, the mixture of commanders, and then big uns and Araboys and boys and gobbos, very much the normal stuff that's from those larger lists. We won't be seeing the pygmy allied contingent again, and quite right too. It's very much of its time in terms of his understanding and characterization of a race, I suppose. And while this is a fantasy game, it's quite clear where a lot of the influences come from, and that definitely wouldn't be right today. If anyone wants to argue about that in the comments, I'm just going to delete your comment, by the way. The Skaven allied contingent offers a lot of stuff that's the same. I think Claneshyn may not have been in the original army list as well, so it does offer a few little extra units in that way. So not all of the lists here are full repeats. The Undead allied contingent, again, there's a necromancer there and a standard bearer, and then there's obviously lots of skeletons and things that we've already seen in the previous army list. And then a bit of a fan favourite always is the halfling allied contingent. I've got quite a few of the miniatures left over from this era, and they are absolutely fantastic. I love them to bits, and hopefully I'll get to field them again at some point in the future. And then there's Zotes as well. Zotes appeared also in 40k. Maybe they'll make a return in the future as a bit of a fun extra. Now we'd move into the mercenaries, and some of this again is a bit of a repetition from what you found in the allies and the existing army list, which seems a little bit strange. But we've got a dwarf mercenary commander and sappers and dwarf mercenary warriors and merchant artillery. So again, it's the same thing with a slightly different name and different artwork, which is pretty cool as well. But again, then we have something really different. We've got giant mercenaries, and we've got an ogre mercenary contingent as well. So there are things that are different. Like I've said a number of times, I like that it's all there. This was a little bit strange to have it repeated, and that's probably my modern day sort of rules reading sensibilities are being applied there. We have half orc mercenary contingent, and that is cool because I think there was just one half orc unit in the standard orc army list as well. So there's a mercenary commander and a half orc shaman, and there's henchmen and bushwhackers and warriors. So you could run a half orc small army if you wanted. I think you could probably run a small army from any of these mercenary contingents or these small allied lists. Restricted, but it'd be a fun thematic way of doing it. Hobgoblin mercenary contingent as well, and you've got a Khan there. So it's some of the kind of the themes that we will see later on when they appear in the Chaos Dwarf army list, and even now with them in Age of Sigmar, some of these themes exist. So it's nice to see the origins of them. There's a Hobgoblin Shaman, there's a contingent standard bearer, there's renegades, there's hobyars, there's hobhound handlers, lots of fun things, and you could probably use those modern day miniatures and build a 3rd edition army or mercenary contingent out of them. Then there is Nippon. I remember owning a Nippon rocket battery back in the day. I didn't have any of the other miniatures, but this would be really cool to see in Warhammer the Old World, especially now we have Grand Cathay. It'd be really cool to see those miniatures appear. And then we have Orc Mercenary contingent, and again it's a little bit of the same stuff repeated with a slightly different name or a different setup. Then followed by more new stuff. We've got a Norse mercenary contingent, so not Chaos Warriors, not Marauders, but a good old-fashioned Norse. We see them represented in Blood Bowl, but not in Warhammer Fantasy, and we're hoping that maybe we'll see them in Warhammer the Old World. It'd be lovely to have some marauding type northern Norsemen who haven't quite fallen to chaos yet. That would be really cool. I'd like to see that in the future. And there's a lot here as well, including some of the Norse dwarves before they turned to chaos. And I had some of those miniatures in days gone by. And then we end with the Old World of Mercenary contingent, and there are some repeats here, but there are also some different things, at least in a thematic way. So we've got a Talian themed troops and a Stallion themed troops, which again, they may well have the same stat lines, work the same way, but it tells you all you need to know about the way they were looking at this game, about trying to represent as many different locations on the map and make it almost fit snugly within the world that we saw as a roleplay game. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition was around at this time, and a lot of these troops and names and images and things, just show this really rich, deep world that now probably wouldn't be repeated because it would just be too many rules for units that miniatures would never be made for. But that wasn't a problem back then. You come up with the rules and you allow the players to go away and do the work themselves, finding the miniatures, converting the miniatures, anything to represent them on the table, which is just cool. Wow. That was a lot. Lots of information there, and hopefully I managed to edit it down enough to get it in around the half-an-hour mark. It's definitely something to listen to as you're hobbying, but there's also lots of visuals as well, so hopefully some of you can enjoy it with a cup of tea and sitting back and putting your feet up. You'll get the true experience of understanding what the game was like back then by looking at the artwork and looking at some of the painted miniatures and how different that it is from today. And that was partly my intention, really, to sort of show us all as gamers we're all living our own eras, our own editions, and some of us are lucky enough to be playing the game for a long period of time, and all the little conversations that go on around metas and rules changes and what's broken and what's not have been had through every single edition of the game. And the main change with the current edition is that we have a broader internet than we've ever had before, more places to get together online and talk about our games, which is absolutely fantastic. But it also means that our complaints and our moans aren't just shared with the guy we're playing a game with, they're shared with more and more people, which sometimes means that things get amplified maybe beyond the issues that they really are. And the most important thing is that you find a way to enjoy Warhammer your way with like-minded people. Sometimes that's really easy for people to do, other times I appreciate it's not. So if you're still here and you've enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Give the video a like for me and drop a comment below. Let me know what your favourite unit or army list was from that era, and would you like to see them return and be in Warhammer the Old World today. It's always fun to hear what you're up to in your own hobbies and your past hobbies as well. If you'd really like to support me making more videos like this, and I love doing this alongside the painting hobby and covering different game systems as well, then please do consider following me and supporting me on Patreon. It is the only way you can really secure me keeping making videos like this. I love doing it, but it takes a long time to record and edit, especially things like this when there's lots of reading and talking to do, and I just want to keep doing it. But the only way I can is if I have support from patrons, and I do at the moment. I have some wonderful patrons, and I'd love to have a few more to make it even smoother. So if you can afford to do that, please do check out the link in the video description below. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.